Hi there.
Hi,
How are you doing?
I am good. How are you?
Okay. A little wet outside.
Yeah, just a little bit, but
I've
it
got
doesn't seem to have hurt protesters.
no.
I was reading somewhere, so take it for what it's worth because I can't cite a source. I was just reading quickly. There are approximately 2 million
Nice.
people.
Nice. Well, the New York.
I think it was specifically along the East Coast, approximately 2 million.
Oh, excellent. I mean, because LA was, I saw the pictures. Huge. Just
Yeah.
absolutely huge.
Well, in LA, I'm not surprised.
Yeah. No, not at all. Um, we are offering a little bit of escapism here today.
Yes.
Um, Welcome to Goodnight, Mr. Holmes, a podcast about the Granada Sherlock Holmes, which ran on ITV in the UK between 1984 and 1994, and ran on Masterpiece Mystery in the US around the same time. I'm Laura.
And I'm Rachel.
And today we are looking at episode 17 in the series, which is called The Abbey Grange.
The story was first published in the Strand in 1904.
So this is the first episode to be shot with Edward Hardwicke. We know that they filmed them out of order.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I was keeping that in mind as I was watching, and it was kind of funny how they were treating him up until a certain point in the episode.
Yes. So according to the author of Bending the Willow, to start with, Edward Hardwicke has very little to do or say in the film. I do not know if this was a deliberate ploy to help ease him into the series, but it seems to me a plausible explanation. However, Hardwicke does seem slightly uneasy, even frosty at times, and certainly more stoical than he later became. His is a much more sober Watson than Burke's. On the other hand, Brett seems fully at ease with his new partner and is brilliant in this story. I mean, Brett could
I thought
be.
Watson was fine. I mean, honestly, if you didn't know it was the first one they filmed, I don't think you would be able to guess.
I mean, I've seen this so many times, and I didn't know until recently.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
Okay, so we open on a scene of a police carriage pulled by two white horses, accompanied by another rider on horseback, and they enter the front gate of a manor house, and the police are ushered inside by the butler, and a man is lying on the floor, bloody, with a very angry expression on his face.
Yeah, his left hand is raised, half clenched.
Yep. Then we are in 221B, where Holmes is gently waking up Watson. And if I were Edward Hardwicke, I'd feel a little vulnerable that my first scene was being asleep and being wakened by someone I barely knew while simultaneously playing a man who knew Holmes intimately. Like, that's just a really hard needle to thread.
Yeah, I noticed he didn't have any lines in this scene.
No.
And the scene ends with him just sitting on the edge of his bed with his head in his hands.
Yep. Holmes says the game is afoot, and he leaves, but then he bursts back into the bedroom.
Well, because Watson is, and then light back down.
Into your clothes and come.
Again, Watson is me.
And then they're on the train on their way to Abbey Grange. The dead man is Sir Eustace Brackenstall. And
okay, before that happens, we just see Holmes on the train as Watson is saying, I think we've thought sufficiently, Holmes. You don't really pick this up in the story, in the episode, but according to the story, this takes place on a bitterly cold and frosty morning.
Yes.
So that's what that line is.
Yes. I was wondering about that, but yes. So the dead man is Sir Eustace Brackenstall, and Holmes is reading out a letter written on Sir Eustace's stationery. My dear Mr. Holmes, I should be very glad of your immediate assistance in what promises to be a most remarkable case. It is something quite in your line. Except for releasing the lady, I will see that everything is kept exactly as I found it. But I beg you not to lose an instant, as it is difficult to leave Sir Eustace there. Yours faithfully, Stanley Hawkins. So
there's a camera angle change to show the letter as Holmes is reading, and you can just barely see Watson's face behind
Yep.
And then after that, they start to treat Watson okay.
Yes.
The letter is from Abbey Grange in Marsham, Kent, sent at 3:30 a.m., although I don't know why the inspector would have put the time on it. but it seems to be a stand-in for Mershon Kent,
Okay.
which was just mostly farms and orchards at the time, and it was, I have this later, so it was the seat of some wealthy family. They had this, huge manor house that had been in the family since Henry VIII.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow. The photo on Google Maps shows me an ostrich. So someone has a zoo there.
That is Mershon Kent. That is what it looks like.
Yes. So Watson informs us that Hopkins has summoned Holmes on 7 previous occasions. Holmes, on the other hand, goes about giving Watson one of his compliments that turns into an insult.
Mm-hmm.
I must admit, Watson, you do have some power of selection, which atones for much of what I deplore about your narratives. Your fatal habit of looking at everything from the point of view of a story instead of as a scientific exercise has ruined what might have been an instructive and even classical series of demonstrations.
And Watson says what I would have said, which is, why don't you write them yourself?
Exactly. And in the story, he's bitter about that. Here, he just seems, kind of mild.
Yeah, which I like that interpretation of Watson. There's a similar scene with David Burke, and Burke acted very hurt by it.
Yes.
Watson was very hurt by it. And this Watson is just like,
yeah, why don't you write it yourself?
Yeah, so write it yourself, and I'm going to stop listening to you now.
Right. He goes behind his newspaper. And
yeah, the transition, the Hopkins had called Holmes in 7 times, and Holmes notes that each of those times made its way into one of Watson's narratives.
Yep.
And then he goes on and bitches about it.
And then Holmes says he will write them in his declining years, whenever those be.
And that's when Watson's like, yeah, I'm not going to listen to it.
So Holmes reflects that what with the coat of arms on the letter paper and the address that dates back to the dissolution of the monasteries, he says, we are moving in high life, as if they don't routinely deal with the nobility. Like every other story, there's a duke or an earl in a huge manor house. I mean, British TV loves these enormous manor houses anyway. And Watson points out that Sir Eustace is one of the richest men in Kent.
Yeah, so Mershon, here's my notes. In the home of the Natchables since the time of Henry VIII, which was the time of the dissolution of the monasteries. So there's a bit of history there. Henry got into a fight with the Pope over an annulment. The Pope said no. Henry told him and the religion he rode in on to go fuck themselves and severed England from the Catholic Church. This was also a land grab, as Henry then took ownership over the church's lands in England. So the dissolution of the monasteries. He also led about the English Reformation, which led to bloody conflicts between Catholics and Protestants after his death, which, yay, go you. Which, from my standpoint as a Jewish person, like the whole thing is kind of, Anglicanism versus Catholicism, is kind of insane, because Anglicanism is really just Catholicism without the Vatican. Henry didn't invent a new religion. He just didn't want to have a pope.
It was others who came after, like Luther and Calvin, who kind of streamlined Protestantism into these different denominations. And, that's why there are Methodists and Lutherans and Presbyterians.
Yeah.
The Natchables, by the way, eventually married into the Mountbatten family.
Oh.
Yes. Norton Louis Philip Natchbull married, who did he marry? Penelope. Yes. His mother was Patricia Mountbatten, and Norton married Penelope Eastwood, who became paramour of Prince Philip. So yes, high life indeed. Anyway, so we're told that Sir Eustace was the last of the Brackenstall heirs, so the line is now extinct. And we see they're in a carriage, then going from the train station to the house, and with this gorgeous countryside with manicured lawns and a lily pond that looks like something out of Monet.
Yeah.
And it leads to the Abbey Grange, where Hopkins greets them with apologies. Apparently, Sir Eustace's wife has come to her senses and given an account that seems to explain everything. So there's not a lot for Holmes and Watson to do now that they've arrived. He tells them a roving gang, the Randalls, a father and two sons, is responsible for Sir Eustace's murder. And Sir Eustace had his head bashed in by his own fireplace poker. And I noticed this is the second story that involves fireplace hardware killing a person.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. They're pretty lethal.
One guy died because he bonked his head on like the brazier in front of the fire. And this was a poker. So yeah, Edwardian times were domestically dangerous.
Yeah, well, all those long skirts women.
Yes, they would catch
or too. Yeah, exactly. You go too close to the fire, you'd go up in flames.
So an interesting point, Lady Brackenstall is played by an actress called Anne Louise Lambert, who also played one of the missing students in the movie Picnic at Hanging Rock.
Yeah, I refer to as Miranda throughout my notes.
Yeah.
She was the leader of the three girls who disappeared.
Who went off, yes. And this movie caused a massive sensation when it came out, and has been a major influence on a lot of films since, especially those of Sofia Coppola.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
That explains a lot, actually.
Yes, right, exactly. And this might explain a detail that we arrive at shortly. Lady Brackenstall has been beaten as well. Her face is bruised.
But there's also romantic music as she's looking at Holmes.
Yes, she's quite
romantic violin music. I'm like, okay, I guess she's the heroine.
And as she's talking, Holmes notices some puncture marks on her arm. And she says that it's nothing. It has no connection with this hideous.
Yeah, I'm like, well, given that they look like she's been pierced by cat claws, I'm like, okay.
Okay, yeah, well, yeah, nothing. It's not major for you.
Yeah, also the camera is like 2 inches from her face here.
Yes. Yes, well, yeah, she's gorgeous. And then she tells them that Sir Eustace drank. Not regularly and consistently, not in a way to hurt our marriage, nor did it interfere with the exercise of his public duties. Nevertheless, the vice was a private shame to him. Apparently,
and anyone who knows anything about the history of women is immediately like, oh, I know what happened here.
Right. But she tells
them.
And
if you don't, then listeners, then we'll finish listening to our podcast first and then go read Susan Glaspell's A Jury of Her Peers.
Oh, yes. Yeah, exactly. So apparently when the urge to drink came over him, Sir Eustace would go away until the poison had exhausted him, never allowing her to witness it. And she explains this all very lovingly, and Watson congratulates her on her compassion.
Yeah, she totally did not kill her husband because he would beat her when she drank, which was often. Watson commends her on her compassion. And there's a close-up on Holmes, like it says to her, have the camera 2 inches from his face, and he just has this brief look on his face like, are you fucking serious, Watson?
But Watson's always taken in by the women. So Lady Brackenstall goes on to say something I found a little weird, that she was grateful for this vice. She grew up in the wine-growing regions of Australia. So this is why
until she stepped through a portal when she was on a trip with her schoolmates.
Right. And this is why we have an Australian actress. Although she doesn't have an Australian accent in this.
No, she really doesn't.
And she tells them, it was a free life. I found it extremely difficult to adapt to the proprieties of England, to being mistress of such a place as this. So I felt if I would show a decent understanding of my husband's weakness, he would in turn forgive me some of my unsuitable behavior. And honestly, I can only think that unsuitable behavior basically means not knowing how to run an English manor. Yeah. Which, who could blame her? She never had any exposure to this.
Yeah. How many people outside the aristocracy would know that?
Right. Lady Brackenstall has a maid, a faithful maid named Teresa, who's a maternal figure to her because her mother died. And in the course of the conversation, she's very upset at what's gone on. Lady Brackenstall informs them that last night the servants had gone to their quarters. Sir Eustace retired at 9:45. The servants stay in the east wing of the house. The Brackenstalls and Teresa stay in the central area.
Yeah, and I noticed that even though Teresa is obviously a servant, she's not classified as a servant.
No, she's more of a companion, although they keep calling her a maid.
Yeah.
She's not a maid. She does no cleaning.
Well, like maybe like lady's maid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which was more like a personal assistant.
Yep. So the servants were far off in the house and wouldn't have heard anything that happened that night. Holmes questions Teresa, and she says she never goes to bed until she's seen that Lady Brackenstall is in bed. But that night, Lady Brackenstall stayed up reading. And we see her holding a book and sitting at a table as a coal kind of falls in the fireplace. And then she gets up and starts blowing out all the candles in the room, and we see her going around the house with a candelabra, making sure that everything's locked up before going to bed. And she rattles off all the lists of rooms that she's visited, and the dining room is locked.
Yeah, and she says that she does it because Sir Eustace was not always reliable in that respect. Like you said, he went away when he drank.
I know, yeah, no.
You probably should have just left that part out.
Exactly. So she's in the dining room checking things, and at that point, a curtain moves, and she gasps. And then she tells Holmes, I found myself face to face with an intruder, a big man, quite elderly. She says they stared at one another for a moment, and then 2 other men came and knocked her unconscious. When she awoke, she was gagged and tied to the chair, a dining room chair, and Sir Eustace was dead on the floor. But she admits to being fuzzy on the details. She knows all the silver was stolen, and the invaders helped themselves to a bottle of port, and she saw them drinking some of it. And Holmes says, how was the alarm raised? And Teresa says, Madam had not come upstairs, and she's fiddling with her handkerchief as she relates this. Earlier, she said she would follow me shortly, so at midnight, I went down just in case she'd fallen asleep over a book. And then Lady Brackenstall says, yes, I hate when I do that. And there I found her, poor lamb, just as she says, and him on the floor, blood and brains all over the room, enough to drive a woman out of her wits, and her gagged and bound, and her very dress spotted with him.
I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that Teresa didn't like Sir Eustace.
Yeah. And Teresa says that she's been a brave woman. They've questioned her enough. She's pouring smelling salts onto the handkerchief, presumably to administer them to Lady Brackenstall. The men leave them alone, go into the dining room, while Hopkins tells them that Lady Brackenstall and Teresa left Australia about 18 months prior at the behest of her father, who essentially needed her to find a husband. So she hasn't been married to Sir Eustace very long at all.
Right, yeah.
Watson examines Sir Eustace's body and says, it is a straightforward enough wound. You see, it begins thus below the ear, then crosses both spheres of the parietal bone at such an angle that this side is smashed as far as the coronal suture. I've never seen anything like it, which does not sound straightforward. Holmes picks up the poker and asks if the older Russell? Randall man was a violent man, and Hopkins confirms, and Holmes says, well, he certainly left his trademark. The ropes used to tie up Lady Brackenstall are still entwined in the chair, and Holmes is fingering them as well, and they're badly frayed at one end. Hopkins goes on, what beats me is how Randall could do so mad a thing, knowing that the lady could describe them and that we would not fail to recognize her description.
Yeah, I know, right?
And Holmes says the criminal mind has its quirks of conscience and scruples. In that respect, it is as individual and curious as any other.
Well, maybe you just didn't see it.
A noted miser may be secretly charitable, so this violent Randall may draw the line at the murder of an unconscious woman, or he may well believe that she did not see him. How is that so? She testifies they stared at each other, says Hopkins. Yes, but she is the one who held the light, says Holmes, and he lights a match and holds it up to Hopkins's face. What Randall may have seen was mostly flickering candle flame.
Okay, but she still would have seen him, though.
Exactly. Yeah, no, things are starting not to add up. He knocked her unconscious at the next instance, thus, for his purposes, solving his problem. And he tells Watson, may I impose upon you to search the Turkish rug? What for, Watson? Holmes says, Watson. Candle wax, Watson, candle wax, Holmes replies. And then he leaps up to the bell pull, which is next to a large stone mantelpiece, which is now devoid of the actual bell pull rope, because that's what was used to bind up Lady Brackenstall. When it was pulled down, the bell in the kitchen must have rung loudly, Holmes says. Well, no one would hear it the way the kitchen is placed, says Hopkins. And meanwhile, Watson is poring over that rug with a scalpel. How did the burglar know that? Holmes wanted to know. Exactly, Mr. Holmes, exactly the very question I put myself. Now, either he has known the house or he may have had dealings with one of the servants. One of my men is going over the record of service at the Grange with the butler at this very moment, says Hopkins. And then Watson has found something on the rug. He holds the scalpel up to Holmes. A scattering of wax and a very light scorching, observes Holmes, invisible but leaving its characteristic scent. The lady would have fallen here. Randall would have snatched up the candelabra immediately. And then Holmes turns to the sideboard, where there's a bottle of port, there's a series of crystal decanters, and some crystal glasses. Interestingly, on the wall next to the sideboard is a Van Dyck portrait of Charles I in his garter robes.
Oh, really?
Not in the National Portrait Gallery where one would expect it, but in a private home, which again shows how wealthy the Brackenstalls are.
Yeah.
And
we're back again to Charles I.
Right, always. Everything goes I suppose that is where they took their refreshment, Holmes notes. To steady their nerves, sir. Yes, port wine, Hopkins confirms. Did Lady Brackenstall say that the butler's corkscrew was used? Holmes asks. No, sir, she was senseless at the moment the bottle was opened, Hopkins says. Quite so, says Holmes. It was opened with a pocket screw, probably contained in a knife. If you examine the top of the cork, you will observe that the screw was driven in 3 times before the cork was extracted. This long screw, and he holds up the butler's corkscrew that's like really long.
Oh, wow.
Would have transfixed it and drawn it with a single pull. When you catch this fella, it is likely that you will find he has a multiplex knife in his possession. So multi-tools go way back.
Apparently.
And I mean, essentially, he's talking about a Swiss Army knife. I have 2 of those that have screws and scissors and all kinds of things.
I don't have any first.
I will give you one of mine next time I see you.
Okay.
Well, I give you 2 of them. Then Holmes.
But if you lose the first one?
I can buy another knife. Holmes picks up the port glasses. There are 3 of them. These 3 glasses do puzzle me, I must confess. Did Lady Brackenstall say that she saw the 3 men drinking? Oh, yes, says Hopkins. She was clear about that. So she didn't see it being uncorked, but she did see them drinking it, which is another weird inconsistency.
Well, I mean, didn't she say she was fading in and out of consciousness?
Good point. Yes. I just don't trust her story.
I believe her implicitly.
Pretty much. She's so gorgeous. Well, then there's an end of it, Holmes says, but he's looking disappointed. Something isn't adding up to him, and Watson has this slight frown as he's watching him. Perhaps, Inspector, when a man has special powers and special knowledge like Sherlock Holmes, it rather encourages him to seek a complex explanation when a simpler one is at hand, Watson says.
Poirot, by the way, says that about himself a lot.
Yeah. Well, Poirot comes directly
from Holmes,
From Holmes via Belgium. Hopkins says he'll let them know when the gang is arrested, and Holmes and Watson are on the train again, bound for London, and Holmes is looking dejected. Poor Holmes, says Watson, you must feel like an abstruse and learned specialist called in for a case of measles. Annoying. Holmes is partially wrapped in this knitted blanket, which makes an appearance periodically throughout the show. And he just says, "Home," in that very Jeremy Brett way. He's just looking very dissatisfied. So the train chuffs through this gorgeous countryside as Holmes is pondering the 3 port glasses. And then he gets off the train at Chelsfield, rapping on Watson's window with his cane. "We must return," he says. "3 glasses." So Watson obediently gets off the train too, because the next scene, they're sitting on a bench at the station waiting for the opposing train to come in and take them back to Abbey Grange. "Watson, we are being dazzled out of observation by that lady's beauty. Beauty may be truth, but she does not necessarily speak it," Holmes says.
No kidding.
"There was port in each glass, but there was only one crusting in one glass. The last glass is the one most likely to contain the crusting."
So I had to look this up. According to winesearched.com, crusted port is a younger, rarer style of port wine that is bottled unfiltered, leaving a sediment,
yes,
the crust,
the sediment,
to form in the bottle with time.
And
top quality crusted port is a blend of wines, and it can take a decade or more to develop a crust.
they, in the original story, they call it bees wings. And there's, in the annotated, there's this long explanation of
They would have to be long.
the bees wings as actually the sediment, and then everything you just said. "If the last pouring had approached the bottom of the bottle, but the bottle was half full and it had been agitated, the crusting was present throughout the port," says Holmes. So it had been distributed. For some reason, the camera pans away from them to a railway worker who's working in a garden nearby.
It's a really lovely garden.
It is. It's beautiful.
Look, we have pretty flowers.
He pulls out his pocket watch, and then he puts on his hat and coat, and he's carrying a green flag. Only 2 glasses were used, and the dregs of both were poured into a third so as to give the false impression that 3 people were there, Holmes says. "If I'm right, Watson, then in an instant the case arises from the commonplace to the exceedingly remarkable." And then
it doesn't, though, really.
he says,
and Watson at one point is like, "I understand."
right. Yes.
Good for you.
And then Holmes says, "That will be the Kentish train." And Watson asks how he is hearing it, because he can't hear it. It's so far off in the distance. "I heard nothing, Watson. I observed." And we see the railway worker with his green flag back on the platform, taking out his pocket watch again as the train begins to pull into the station. So every so often, we have to have these random proofs of Holmes's personality.
Yeah, just in case you
missed the point.
Wanted to know if Holmes was very observant.
"Lady Brackenstall and her maid must have had some very good reason for shielding the real criminal," says Holmes. "Well, Watson, we shall just have to construct our case for ourselves without them." And they get on the train. So in the carriage taking them from the train back to the Grange, Holmes is urging the carriageman to hurry. They get to the house. For some reason, it's thundering. Hopkins has left. They walk around the exterior. They pass the stables, and then they go into a field where there's a lot of abandoned farm equipment. How many frustrated episodes for the laboring men here could one reconstruct from this mechanical cemetery? Holmes asks. And then he stops by a wall and looks over it. There's like I don't know if it actually was a lily pond at the beginning. There's a body of water on the estate. And it's never clear in most of these stories whether it's a stream, a river, a pond, what have you.
Yeah, a creek or
right.
Sewage drainage.
"What's this, Watson?" And there's a partially sunken gravestone on the other side of it, sunken in the water, that says "Fudge." Not entirely mechanical, it seems. And he hops over the wall and pulls out the gravestone. So it comes in 2 halves with the Latin inscription on the bottom part that basically says "Rest in peace." "I imagine this is a pet's gravestone," says Watson. "It has been smashed, mended," Holmes says, "and smashed again with deliberate force. The story it tells is of the immediate past." Holmes gets up and turns around as Watson continues examining the stone. Holmes is pacing around this little area, and then he squats down. "Watson, the remnants of a dog's collar." And we see him pulling it up out of the muck, and the tag says "Fudge." So
yeah, I'm going to go on record as saying not only am I not sorry Sir Eustace is dead, I might have killed him myself. Cruelty was not grounds for divorce in England until the Matrimonial Act of 1937. So if you're a wife shackled to an abusive man until one of you is dead, I'm fully on the side of women who decided the dead one was not going to be them.
Totally agree. And actually, a lot of that happened in the US too.
Yeah, but I'm not alone in thinking that. There was even a Medium article pointing out that men who oppose no-fault divorce are rushing to their own funerals, is how they put it. You will find fewer husbands dying once no-fault divorce is enacted.
Exactly. Suddenly they're not falling down the stairs as much.
Yep.
Or eating poison somehow.
Usually that, but yeah.
Mysterious heart attacks for no discernible reason.
Mm-hmm.
So
he was working too hard.
Holmes accosts a passing bicyclist up on the bridge and says, "Has any servant been dismissed from the house in the last month?" And when he's told no, he clutches at the dog collar and says, "Then it's as I thought." And we're back in the dining room at the Grange, where we spend an awful lot of time. Holmes has got the 3 port glasses in front of him, and he's holding the dog collar. "Fudge," he says, just like enunciating all the letters, like he's just a little bit angry.
Mm-hmm.
And Watson is smoking further down the dining table. "Lady Brackenstall's pet dog, let us imagine, dies," Holmes says. "It may not be too fanciful to suggest the poor, unfortunate creature was literally killed." "For what reason?" Watson asks. "Reason, I suggest, hardly entered into it," Holmes says. "It was done in a fit of insane rage." "By whom?" Watson asks. "By a drunken, sadistic ruffian," Holmes says. "One of the murderers?" Watson asks. I mean, he's just like,
as a doctor, Watson really should have figured this out before Holmes.
He is not following along. "No, Watson, the lady's husband, the last of the Brackenstalls," Holmes says, gesturing up at, there's a portrait of Brackenstall as a young man behind him. "Brackenstall," says Watson. "Consider it. No one but a member of the household could vandalize a gravestone and yet remain in place," meaning anybody would be fired for that. "Why should Brackenstall entertain such an obsession about a pet animal that he would forbid any remembrance of it?" Holmes says. He nears Watson, who is still smoking. "You saw the marks, of course, on the lady's arm." "Yes," said Watson. "I'm surprised they did not interest you more." "They were stab wounds made by a needle or a hat pin," Holmes says. "The lady has been living in fear of her physical safety, Watson." And then he leaps up the side of the stone mantelpiece towards, what remains of the bell pull.
That's like rock climbing on the wall.
"Watson, we have got our case. How nearly have I made the blunder of a lifetime? But now the chain is almost complete." And then he carefully scales his way back down to the floor. It's always harder coming down than going up. "So you've got your men," Watson says, still not following along. "Man, Watson, man, only one, but a remarkable person, strong as a lion, active as a squirrel, dexterous with his fingers, and finally remarkably quick-witted."
Just really all around awesome.
I also love the way the British say squirrel.
I mean, I personally think there shouldn't have been a man involved at all. It should have just been the 2 women.
I agree.
A spoiler, not really.
No.
But the story was written by a man, and
who couldn't conceive of women doing it?
Yeah, expecting a man to decenter men in a story in which women are clearly the heroes is kind of too much to ask nowadays, let alone a man in 1904.
Not to mention that the 2 main characters are actually not the women, but Holmes and Watson, also men.
Yep.
So they go out into some kind of little patio, right, where Lady Brackenstall and Teresa are sitting by a fountain. Teresa's in a wicker chair. She's knitting. Lady Brackenstall is sitting on some stone steps below her. "Ah, Lady Brackenstall," Holmes says, "I do not wish to cause you any unnecessary trouble. My one desire is to make things easier for you." He sits down next to her. "I'm convinced that you are a much tried woman." And he holds up the tag from the dog collar that says Fudge. "If you trust me and treat me as a friend, you may find that I will justify that trust," he says. "What do you want me to do?" she says. "Tell me the truth," he says. "Mr. Holmes!" He is shocked at the accusation of lying. "No, please, Lady Brackenstall, it is of no use. You may have heard of any little reputation that I may possess. I will stake it all on the fact that your story is a complete fabrication, he says. You're an impudent fellow, says Teresa. You're trying to say that my mistress has told a lie? Have you nothing to tell me, Holmes says. I have told you everything, Lady Brackenstall says. Now just think once more, Lady Brackenstall. Wouldn't it be better to be frank, he says. I have told you all I know, she says. I am sorry, Holmes says, and he looks regretful. He's not regretting. I mean, she's obviously holding something back, and he's sorry about what he has to do to get it out of her.
Yeah, I mean, this is really just about, I want you to tell me the story.
Mm-hmm.
That's all this. It's like, dude, just walk away.
Right.
You know what happened and why. You agree that it was justified. Just stop.
Right. Let it all go. He and Watson then get into the carriage to go back to the train station. And while they are riding, Holmes says, the bell rope gave us a clue, which should have left us in no doubt. If you were to pull down a bell rope, Watson, where would you expect it to break? Surely at the top, where it is attached to the wire, not 3 inches from the top. But the rope was frayed, Watson points out. The rope which bound Lady Brackenstall was frayed. He was cunning enough to do that with his knife. But the other end was not, meaning the end that's still dangling from the top of the bell pull. If you had stood on the mantelpiece as I did, you would have seen that it is cut through. Then Holmes stops the carriage and leaps out. They are again by this body of water. Watson, that log has not moved since early this morning, he says.
It didn't get up and walk away as I expected it to.
Right. Perhaps it snagged on something, Watson says. I guess there's a current in this body of water.
I guess. It didn't really seem like it, but sure.
No, but, that could be a filming choice. Holmes is feeling around in the dirt beside him. Some bricks are disturbed. Or anchored, he says. They go back to the house. God, they keep going back and forth to the house. And Holmes hands one of the servants a note for Hopkins. See that he gets this on his return, he says. And then they're off to Chislehurst Station, which is odd because I looked it up. It's nowhere near Kent. It's in central London. And Watson is understandably confused. Where to now, he says. The shipping office of the Southern Cross Line, Holmes says. Yes, of course, Watson says, but he does not mean that. No idea. The Southern Cross Line is the principal passenger carrier between Adelaide and London, Holmes says, clarifying precisely nothing. Back at the Grange, we see Hopkins supervising some men in a rowboat on the stream, where Holmes noticed the not moving log, stream, whatever. In the shipping office, so we bounce back and forth between these two scenes. In the shipping office, the Italian clerk there, and he is Italian, tells Holmes and Watson, in May of that year, only one of ours reached the home port, our flagship, the Rock of Gibraltar. I'll have the passenger list set up. And at the Grange, Hopkins's men are hauling the log to shore, and we see it's 2 logs bound together, and it was anchored. There's a big, like, orange cast iron thing. And it was
completely forgotten about the stolen silver.
It was marking a spot in the stream where the quote unquote stolen silver had been stored. And at the shipping office, the clerk, quite a handsome actor, stands in a library full of log books by a really ornate chess set. I love these library scenes.
Yeah, I've always wanted a library. Like,
yes. And there's a bust of Queen Victoria, which is not surprising. It's 1904, so the Edwardian reign didn't last that long, and Victoria, like, she gave the country a hangover for a long time after.
Yeah, she lived forever.
Just like Elizabeth.
Yeah. Yep.
He's reading from the passenger list, which is this great big heavy tome. Ah, here we are, Miss Mary Fraser of Adelaide, first class, accompanied by her maid. Where is the Rock of Gibraltar now? Holmes says. And I want to say it's in Gibraltar, but it's a ship, not a rock. It's also the logo of the company I work for.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I did not know. I didn't know that was the logo.
The slogan used to be "Get a piece of the rock."
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's life insurance and retirement planning. So, yeah. So they wanted to convey an image of stability and what's more stable than the Rock of Gibraltar.
As everyone knows.
Yes, right. The clerk walks up to this large wall map and he says, at noon today, she was steaming west through the Arabian Gulf, Mr. Holmes, heading for Suez, I hope. Is it your policy to transfer officers between ship and ship? Holmes asks, fiddling with the globe. He's always got to fiddle with something. No, not at all, says the clerk. It is our policy not to. Ah, I have you, Mr. Holmes. You are asking the whereabouts of a member of the crew of the Rock who has been seen very recently, but not on the ship. Mr. Viviani, your perspicacity astonishes me, Holmes says, leaning over the chessboard. And these chess pieces, I was fascinated with them because I love chess sets. I'm horrible at the game, but I love the chess sets. The pieces are carved in red and white and are very large and ornate. I assure you, it is only through study of the good doctor's masterly exposition of your work that I now have any small capacity to reason.
And Watson is very smug in the background.
Yes. Really, you amaze me, Holmes says. Watson, are you taking notes? And Viviani also gives a little smile. Somehow he knows that stroking Holmes's ego is never a bad idea.
Yeah. I think you would learn that very quickly if you read Watson's.
Exactly. Also, you would be very pleased to hear that I know exactly who the officer is. And Holmes looks up from the chessboard in surprise. And just then, a maid enters with a tea tray. Tons of maids in this story. Yes, gentlemen, the only officer from that voyage of the Rock who is not aboard her now is Jack Crocker, a magnificent chap. Am I not correct, Mrs. Burbage? And the maid gives a wide smile and giggles.
Yeah.
And as she's leaving, Viviani says, Crocker has that effect. Delightful fellow, handsome as a prince. The crew worship him. We've promoted him captain of our new vessel, the Bass Rock. It's all rocks with these people. He's the youngest captain we have, but he'll be the best. Not an officer in the fleet to touch him. And Viviani is like pouring out the tea. Holmes says he doesn't want any. Viviani passes a cup of tea to Watson. He is hot-headed and excitable, Viviani continues, but loyal, honest, and kind-hearted. Sometimes in this life, you meet people who are what you might call large-souled, who are privileged to know. Crocker is one of those. And Holmes is looking pensive. So now we're back at 221B, and Holmes is smoking his really long-stemmed pipe. And he says to Watson, once or twice in my career, I feel I've done more real harm by my discovery of the criminal than ever he had done by his own crime. But I've learned caution now, and I'd rather play tricks with the law than with my own conscience.
So it's time to have some fun.
And in comes John Crocker, Jack Crocker, whatever. I've got your telegram. I've come at the hour you said. I've heard you've been down to the office. There's no getting away from you, is there? And Holmes has his back to Crocker. He's not saying anything. Speak up, man. You can't stand there and play cat and mouse with me. What do you know? At that point, Holmes turns around. Give him a cigar, Watson. As Crocker sits down and lights up, Holmes says, bite on that, Captain Crocker, and try not to let your nerves run away with you. I should not sit here smoking with you if I thought you were a common criminal. And Crocker's like confused, but he's also very sullen right now. Tell me, what did you use to secure the silver to the floating log? Holmes says. My guess, it was fishing gut from the gun room, but I was not present at its recovery. Am I right? What do you want? Crocker says. Justice, says Holmes. For whom? Crocker says. We are not partisan. We just want to see justice done. That is all, Holmes says. And he pronounces it partisan.
Yes.
Very well, Crocker finally says. Was it fishing gut? Holmes says. No, twine, Crocker says. And Holmes smiles in triumph. He's broken through. It was a throwback, Crocker's talking now. It was a throwback to my days before the mast as a youngster. Even now, I always carry a silver coin, a length of twine, and a
multiplex
knife. Holmes says. How the devil do you know that? Crocker says, pulling it out of his pocket. And it indeed is a Swiss Army knife. He stands up and he's practically in Holmes's face.
Yeah, he's trying to be intimidating.
Who are you? He says. And Holmes, I love the scene, pokes him in the chest with the long stem of his pipe. Now, give me a true account of everything that happened at the Abbey Grange last night. Be frank with me, and we may do some good. Play tricks with me, and I'll crush you. And Crocker comes even closer, and they have a little stare down. Then he moves away to the window. I'll chance it, Crocker says, but one thing I'll say first. I regret nothing, I fear nothing, and I'd do it all again if I had to and be proud of the job. Damn the man. Well, that's my side of things anyways. When I think of Mary, sweet Mary Fraser, and I think of getting her into this bloody business, that turns my soul to water. And then, of course, we have to have the flashback. We see Lady Brackenstall prior to her marriage as Mary Fraser on the ship, dancing with Crocker. I met her when I was first officer on my last ship, Crocker says. She treated me as fairly as ever a woman treated a man. We were never engaged. I've no complaint, but it was all love on my side and all good comradeship and friendship on hers. That's a familiar story.
Yeah, when they're stopped dancing, they go to the edge of the boat. I'm sure there's a name for it that I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, but the railing.
And she's staring happily out at the water, and he's staring creepily at her.
Right. When we parted, she was a free woman, but I could never again be a free man. So he's got it bad.
Mm-hmm.
And we see him walking around the deck of the ship in the morning after that dance, kind of kicking away the decorations, and he's very morose. Next time I came back from the sea, I read of her marriage, Crocker says. It seemed to be the sort of thing she was made for. I didn't grieve. I felt it to be right. So I never thought to see her again. And Watson is hanging on his every word. This man loves a love story.
Yeah.
I mean, the expression on his face, he's like eating this up.
But also, he also really, really loves knowing things that other people don't know.
That is true.
And he's hearing a story that he's not going to pass on to anyone.
But last voyage, I was promoted and the new boat was not yet launched. So I had to wait for a while, for a couple of months with my people in Kent. So Kent is on the, if you look at a map, it's on the right-hand side and juts out into the water. So yeah, it's near the sea. I knew now where she was, but I stayed away. Then I met Teresa Wright one day, and she told me all about her, about the marriage, about the man's drunken cruelty, about everything. Do you know, this noble baronet burned her pet dog and threatened to do as much to her. So yes, inexcusable, setting a dog on fire. Crocker turns to face Watson and Holmes. I tell you, gentlemen, it nearly drove me mad. I did meet Mary, and I met her again, and last week she would meet me no more. I was then given notice that leave on my voyage within the week. And then another flashback, but it's only like a day ago. We see Lady Brackenstall walking through the house with her candelabra, doing her security checks. Crocker is outside Abbey Grange, watching through the windows. She goes into the dining room, and he approaches the dining room window from the outside. She pulls back the curtain like she's scared, but then she laughs in relief. You're mad. How could you come here? She says. I'm to go away, Mary. I've been given a ship. To go and not say farewell. I thought I might never see you again. So he's inside the dining room at this point. Again, it's one of these long windows that goes all the way to the floor. So it's a door, essentially.
Yeah.
Mary turns away from him. You'll make a fine captain. You must not let anything spoil such an opportunity. I fear for you, he says. You can do nothing, she says. Aye, that it is which hurts most, I think, Crocker says. And the two of them are kind of getting closer together.
Yeah, and the soundtrack is it felt like 1940s movie music when somebody is about to go off to war.
Exactly. Yes. I should have gone mad these past few weeks if it had not been for the thought of you, Mary says. And then she smiles and says, my friend.
And just what he wanted to hear.
Aye, friend will do, Mary. It is the measure of my love for you. It's so strong it will live on crumbs. He's really down bad. Jack, don't make me say it. It won't make us any happier. You know what I feel, she says, and she's got her hands on the collar of his peacoat. Do I? He says. You know you do, she tells him. then I shall go a happier man than when I came. She tells him he cannot stay, and she starts to walk away from him, but then she takes off her locket and she gives it to him. And they look like they're about to kiss, but there's a shuffling in the hall. And the door opens and old Sir Eustace comes in.
Yeah, and Mary, she puts her face in her hands.
Yes.
Not like, oh God, he's caught me with my lover, but more like, oh Christ, it's my drunk asshole husband again.
Yes. At last, I have you, madam, at your trade. Here's a key to your damn modesty. You have a profession, madam, a damn whore, a gutter queen, a filthy jade. And he comes closer to her, and then he punches her right in the face.
Yep.
And she falls to the floor. He's continuing to insult her, and then Crocker attacks him. They fight. Sir Eustace is coming at Crocker with his cane. And then Teresa comes in, and she rushes over to Mary, who's still on the floor. And she's sobbing. Crocker grabs the poker.
And she, I think, like kind of crouches over Mary, like she's protecting her with her own body.
Yeah. And it's a kind of like almost a pietà moment, like she's holding her.
Yes.
So Crocker grabs the poker. He whacks Sir Eustace, dealing the death blow. And this was a really funny, like, weird thing. He steps over Sir Eustace's body, and I notice that the blood stains on the carpet are actually red paper or felt cutouts. You can see their little shadows on the rug. They don't lie down flat. I guess they couldn't stain the carpet beforehand if they were going to do retakes.
But that's funny.
Funny detail. And the rug is white, except for like a zebra pattern on one side of it. So I'm like, all right.
We can't harm this carpet. We don't have the budget to replace it.
Yeah. And then Jack opens the bottle of port, pours a glass for Mary, another for himself, for the shock, presumably. What happened, Mary says. I killed him, Crocker says. And Mary starts crying. What are we going to do? Listen to your old Teresa. You were marked with a blow that could have killed you. That shall be your salvation, Teresa says. And we're staring at Sir Eustace with blood all over his face and in his eye, and those stupid fake blood stains in his head. Definitely, yeah.
They told the actor, I'm just trying to stay really still. You can't get any blood on the carpet, okay?
And meanwhile, we're going to tuck these little felt pieces.
Yeah.
Don't move. Teresa was as cool as ice, Crocker tells Holmes and Watson. It was her plot as much as mine. We must make it appear the burglars had done the thing. Teresa kept on repeating our story to her mistress, whilst I swarmed up and cut the rope to the bell. Then I lashed her in her chair, frayed out the end of the rope to make it look natural. The silver, well, you know about that. I do, and the third glass of port to tie in with the Randalls, says Holmes. Yes, and we dropped the candlestick where Mary fell, for the wax would splash on her. I never thought the police could have seen through our dodge. When I knew that savage fiend was dead and she was free of him, I reckoned I'd done the best night's work of my life. I still do, even if I swing for it. And he stops pacing. Crocker sits down. That is the truth, the whole truth, sir. And Holmes reaches over to him and takes his hand. And he said, yes, you have told me the truth. And if the lady's maid had been less abstemious and had accepted your glass of port, your ingenuity might have fooled me, as you have certainly fooled the police. What put you on to me? How on earth did you find me? Crocker says. No one could have got up to that bell rope but an acrobat or a sailor, Holmes says.
Or a consulting detective.
I was ignoring the fact that he also got up there. No one but a sailor could have made the knots with which the cord was fastened to the chair. It was evident that the lady was shielding to someone. To do so under such circumstances meant that she must love that person. And Crocker lifts up his head like, love?
You mean she loves me?
It is not too wild a leap of the imagination to connect her with an officer of the ship which brought her to this country, Holmes says, as the front bell rings. And Watson goes to the door. You are expecting a visitor, Holmes says. I am, says Crocker.
Truly brilliant, this guy.
And Mary enters the room. dressed all in black except for a red scarf. She hugs Crocker. Dearest, the gentleman knows everything. There's no hiding from him, he says. I know. His telegram brought me here, she says. What do you intend, Mr. Holmes? And this is a great scene. Holmes is off to the side in his bedroom, washing his hands and his face. Well, Captain Crocker, this is a very serious matter, yet I feel sure on the basis of the story which you have told us here tonight, a British court of law will understand that you acted in defense of your own life. That, however, is for a jury to decide. Meanwhile, I have so much sympathy for you that if you choose to disappear within the next 24 hours, I promise no one will hinder you. And he comes back out into the sitting room wearing his dressing gown, the mouse-colored one. Then it will all come out. It
really shows off his complexion.
Yeah. Then it will all come out, Crocker points out. What sort of proposal is that? Mary would be left to face the music. Held as an accomplice, maybe. No, sir, it will not do. Jack, you must go, says Mary. I shall not, says Crocker. I mean, this is melodrama. Calm yourself, Captain, says Holmes. I was only testing you.
Mm-hmm.
Watson, this fellow rings true every time. It is a great responsibility that I take upon myself, but we will do it in due form of law. Crocker, you are the prisoner. Watson begins to stand up, but Holmes is holding him by the elbow. Watson, you are the British jury, and I have never met any man more eminently fitted to represent one. Now, gentleman, you have heard the evidence. Do you find the prisoner guilty or not guilty? Not guilty, says Watson, the jury. Vox populi, vox Dei. And you are acquitted, Captain Crocker. All be so easy. Abracadabra.
That'll convince the police, I'm sure.
And Mary's smiling by this point, and Crocker sits down. He's still bothered. What if the police arrest some other poor devil? What then? Then I will use all my powers to persuade them of their mistake, Holmes exclaims. If they
very forcefully, like, could you try being a little less honorable right now, though?
Right. If they light on you, that is another matter. However, I think that is unlikely. Come back to this lady in a year's time, and may her future and yours justify us the judgment we have pronounced this evening. And this is where the original story ends. But Granada gives us something a little extra. Mary throws herself at Holmes, hugging him. Oh, thank you. And Holmes does his best not to recoil. Very awkwardly kind of like pulls himself away from her and walks to the window. Watson escorts the couple to the door. Madam, I am intrigued. You gave such a compelling account of a man's sad addiction to drink, yet it was not, as we now know, a portrait of your husband, but it was such a clear description. I wondered, my father, she tells him, he sent me away to England because of it. His self-management was the reason I did not fear the vice in my husband, because I knew of it before we were married. How foolish I was. You know, different drunks act different ways.
Yeah.
Thank you, madam. I felt sure that your story was true to reality. Good luck to you. And as they leave, Holmes is back, you know, still looking at the window, clasping the back of his head with his hands. And then a little later, we see both men in their robes. They're smoking in their easy chairs and have snifters of brandy in their hands. Very, very Edwardian.
Yes.
It's almost as though you disapproved of the happiness we have fostered this day, Holmes says. Oh, no, I approve of that. Of course I do. But I'm uneasy that you took upon yourself the duties of advocate and judge, Watson says.
Yeah, those are separate duties and should be done by separate people.
You are too bound by forms, Watson, Holmes says. Forms are society. Manners maketh man, Watson says. Oh, says Holmes. And then Watson says, well, it's just as well that you are unique. And while they're both smiling at that, Holmes's face gets deeply serious almost immediately. And we can kind of tell, okay, where's the next case?
Like, fuck off, Watson.
Right. So yeah, that's where
it's best that laws be made by men for the benefit of men at the expense of women.
And minorities.
Yeah.
Especially minority women. Yes. Yeah, that's what we're looking at now.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a pretty dark time here. We don't like it.
Yeah. We like the ending to this stuff.
Yes. I would like to also be in a dressing gown with a glass of brandy before a
Yeah,
fight.
I was just thinking, that sounds really nice.
I do have a new one. I seem to be collecting robes, um, and I got a kimono from a store that I love called Pearl River, which is yeah, it was started by Chinese immigrants, but they're multi Asian. You can anything East Asian you can get there.
Oh yeah, I think I've been there.
It's
It's a very
lovely.
cool place. Yeah.
Yeah. Brocade everywhere.
Yeah.
I had a really great brocade glasses case at one point, and everything is wildly inexpensive. So anyway, what did you think of all this?
I think Susan Glassfell did it better.
Susan.
Susan Glassfell
Oh, yes.
did it better.
Yes. Well,
but it's still pretty forward thinking for a male writer in 1904.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we know that Conan Doyle was, I mean, he was, I would call him a proto-feminist. Like, before there was feminism, he believed that women had brains and used them.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that was because of his relationship with his mother. He adored his mother, just absolutely adored her. And she didn't have a whole lot of he kept trying to get her to come live with him, and she wouldn't do it. She was a mistress of some earl somewhere who had set her up in a cottage, and she was like, yeah, I'm not coming.
Yeah, I don't blame her.
I like it here. So yeah, this is good. The whole, the manor house stuff is always, that's what we think of when we think of England.
Yeah.
And it's not that. So in a way, it's kind of like propaganda the same way Agatha Christie's like the mysterious affair at Styles and like all these big manor houses out in the country. Yeah. But yeah, nowadays most of those places are owned by the National Trust and are event venues and museums.
Yeah, they'd be hard to keep up.
Absolutely. Even the people who still own Highclere Castle, which is Downton Abbey, they live in a small piece of it.
Yeah, because the heating for that place.
Yes. Actually, there's a woman I follow on YouTube who calls herself the American Viscountess. She is married to the son of the Earl of Sandwich. And she's from Illinois. She's a cutie. I like her a lot. Her name is Julie. And she initially did a lot of her YouTube kind of broadcasts from her kitchen, where they had an Agus stove that was on all the time.
To heat the place, yeah.
You can't shut it down. Yeah. So yeah, it's not like a modern stove where you can turn it off. You can't. And so it is the only warm spot in the house.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's a huge issue. It's summertime, not so much. I mean, a lot of British houses don't even have like screens because they don't have mosquitoes the same way we do.
Yeah. Yeah, and they don't have heat the way we do.
No. Yep.
So I think it was a few years ago. It was there was a heat wave in Europe, and it was really hard on people because they didn't have air conditioning because it was never something that was needed.
Exactly. Well, big stone buildings, even if they're apartments, they're still big stone buildings. I actually was in Sicily at one point, and in an apartment house, but it was the entire thing was made of marble.
Wow.
And they didn't have air conditioning because it was never, the marble never heated up.
Yeah.
So any further thoughts on this episode?
Sorry, I'm distracted by one of my cats has decided to barf on the floor near me.
Oh, is that what I hear? It sounded like, because of the Google Meet filtering, it sounded just like a mouse scrolling.
No.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, there he goes, Anne.
Oh, no.
I'm thoroughly distracted. What are your thoughts about this?
I just gave them all. I think I'm tapped out.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
what have we got happening next time? Not next week, but next time.
Yes, that's all from us this week. If you've enjoyed the show and haven't subscribed yet, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to support us, you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Tell your friends. And join us next week when we'll be discussing The Man with the Twisted Lip.
Oh, cool. All right. But it's not next week because you're going away.
Yes,
It's the week after.
it's the week after.
Cool. All right. Well, go and attend to your poor cat. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.